Welcome to our discussion on data-driven manufacturing. I'm Jared Young with Landmark Credit Union. Very fortunate to be joined today by Rick Sovitzky, partner in outsourced accounting and advisory services with Chortek, John Rinaldi, president and CEO of Real-Time Automation, and Michael Steger, president and chief operating officer at Waukesha Metal Products. We're all striving to overcome challenges, improve processes, and identify efficiencies. This is especially true for manufacturers. In today's fast-paced manufacturing environment, the integration of data analytics has become essential. Our panel of experts is going to guide us through how they, as well as their customers, are using vast amounts of data generated from machinery and production lines to make critical business decisions. Before we hear from Rick, we'd like to start with a couple of questions to get to know the audience a little bit better. By a show of hands, who here is representing a company with between 1 and 75 employees? Okay, how about 75 to 150? Great. And larger than 150? Okay. And who here is currently using data analytic tools? Excellent. Thank you. With that, Rick, I'll hand it over to you.
Okay. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm going to begin by just briefly talking about Chortek. I'm going to explain what I'm going to be covering and then also the difference in what John and Michael are going to be covering. In short, Chortek is a public accounting and advisory firm, and we focus on the manufacturing sector. Specifically, I'm going to be talking about data analytics and kind of how we're helping our manufacturing customers actually use the data that they're collecting. John is going to be talking about, well, from the shop floor, how do you go about obtaining data if you aren't getting it today? And Michael's going to be talking about what can happen if you focus on some specific metrics and the business impact of those. So with that said, I'm going to be painting a picture and kind of show how analytic tools can help understand fundamental costing and profitability. That's kind of the overall topic that I'm going to be covering. And I'm going to do that. I'm going to actually show this live interactively. And, excuse me. How many people have used Power BI before? Okay, good show of hands. The underlying assumption here is that for a manufacturer, we have a functioning ERP system, and at the very minimum, we're able to collect profitability by part, by job, and so on. What I'm going to share is a few different ways of looking at that gross profit information, which can help drive some decisions. So what we have on screen here is purposeful color coding of information to help the user who's going to be interpreting this data to ask some questions. One of the points I heard earlier in the comment from George was hiring people that are curious. And so one of the roles in data analytics, one of the objectives is, can you give information to people in different ways so they can actually look at the same fundamental information differently? In this case, I'm going to expand this here. The darker the green, the higher the gross profit for the orders over whatever time period that we're looking at. The larger the rectangle, the larger the dollar of gross margin. So just looking at this, what stands out? Are they all the same shade of green? The human eye is very good at depicting patterns or outliers. And so we're looking at gross profitability, but clearly some areas here represented are much more profitable than others. The question, of course, is why? That's the fundamental question. Why is something more profitable than something else? So as I scroll back here, the ability of an analytics tool is to look at this really in any time scale. And in some cases, we want to look at the big picture and look over a long period of time. In other cases, we want to be just focusing on what happened, say, in the last month. And start asking those questions. What's different? Clearly, there are some very dark greens, and there's some much lighter greens. And the question is why? What's actually going on? So the ability then to drill down and see, show me fundamentally those particular jobs and start doing some comparisons is in essence what you do or what you can do as long as the right people have access to this information. I'll look at the same thing a slightly different way. This is a profit decomposition. So I'll just look at this year so far. And in this company, fictitious job shop, there's 4,100 jobs. The question is how to break down the 1.2 million of profit, gross profit, and looking at it again in different ways. This is going to be the very same information, but depicted differently. So in this case, I can break that down between A, B, and C customers, further break it down, and it's a little subtle on the screen here, but there's the same color shading going on as well. Drill down, in this case, it's a manufacturer that also does distribution. So is there a profit margin difference between in-house manufactured versus value added? And really getting down to the customer level. And we can further drill down all the way to the job or the part level. And part of the benefits then of using a tool like this is to get the right people in the organization asking why. Why is there differences? Do we understand why there are differences? And actually then taking action. And specifically taking action, I'll explain that in a second. We'll look at one more variation of the same thing. Same data, job profitability, but in this case plotted as a scattergram. And as I click through, what we want to do in data analytics is allow interactivity, but also keep it simple. So there's not a lot of controls on the screen on purpose. And this, what we do share on the screen and what you can click on, for example, distributed versus manufactured, that may or may not be relevant for any one manufacturer. The question is, what are those relevant questions, those dimensions, those ways of looking at the data that you want people to be asking the questions? So notice what happens here as I click through and look at our A customers, which by definition are the bulk of our dollars, but a small count of customers. As I click through, I'm seeing not just more and more green. You see you're starting going up the graph there, but there's many more occurrences of them. And what we want to have our people do is, again, be curious. What's different? Was that expected? And what am I going to do to dig into the detail? So I'm not going to do it right now, but we want to give them the ability to drill all the way down into the individual jobs. Is it a cost issue? Is our margin the fundamental problem? And that's essentially what data analytics allows the our end employees to be asking those questions, but we do it within guardrails so that they're not spending time generating reports and doing this again and again and again on a manual process. So I'll show one more little bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to John. Here's a view of customer concentration. And what this is doing is taking an aggregate. It's kind of a busy page on purpose. It's taking an aggregate of what are the last 12 months worth of sales by customer, but we're also adding in what is the current backlog for the company, what is the work in process on the floor already, and how much do they owe us. And so what Power BI does and other analytics tools, what it does very, very well is it's going to automate so that I'm not relying on someone in the accounting area to calculate this as part of their month-end process or maybe once a quarter. This is being updated every day. And so it lets me see how concentrated I am, in this case the top 50%, high concentration here of 6 customers. And we're trying to prevent the iceberg, right? We know who our biggest customers are, but this is trying to make sure when we look at a composite figure, how many eggs do we have in one basket, okay? And does everyone on the team know, all right, how are we going to do and keep these best customers? Because that is literally the lifeblood of this company. From an action standpoint, I like to focus on, well, show me the bottom 20% roughly. So I'm just changing the slider on the screen. And this is our hunting ground for adding incremental profit to the company. Without new customer acquisition, without additional sales efforts, it's how can we get, thinking back of that plotter graph, how can we get more green out of this customer base, this small volume of customers, and do price testing, test additional markups, and grow the total gross profit to the company, not just higher and higher revenue. And so that's an example where you can take this information and focus on segments of the customers and always have it up to date. That's one of the other keys. Can you act on it by making sure as new orders get accepted, as new orders are shipping, that this composite number is always updating? And so that's just a taste of what you can do with data analytics, how we're helping some of our other customers actually use it and then come up with plans to actually do something about it. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Jared.
Yeah, that looks very interesting, Rick, but what if you can't trust the data being fed in?
Well, you got to ask the question why, right? To make decisions, you need good information, period. Data analytics tools can do work with kind of cleaning up data, but as we continue on with the conversation, part of the question is, well, how do you get the data correct at the source in the first place? Okay, so I'm going to kind of punt on that a little bit. And you would want to focus on, well, what's the root cause of why can't you really trust it? And I would want to focus on solving that first.
That makes sense. Next, we'll hear from John Rinaldi, our Master of Connectivity from Real-Time Automation.
Thank you, Jared. So our company focuses on moving data out of manufacturing systems, and I can't see the slides, so I'm not quite sure it's in there. I've written I've written about 10 books, and I've been doing connectivity on the factory floor for about 35 years. Go ahead to the next one. I'd like to talk about really the challenges of the factory floor. There's a 3 challenges I'd like to highlight. The first one is the legacy challenge. We've been doing manufacturing in the U.S. now for since the 50, 60, 70 years, and automation has been around probably since the 1970s. There's a lot of old equipment out there. I was at Lipton Tea. The Lipton Tea machines were made in 1919. There's really, the process of making tea doesn't change. You're still taking the leaves, and you've been doing that for 3,000 or 4,000 years, taking leaves and making them into powder. There's no ROI in improving that machine. So they're still running the old machine. And that happens more than you would imagine. We did a job at the Bellagio Hotel. If anybody's been to Las Vegas, you've obviously seen the fountains. Those fountains were built in the 1970s. For a long time, they were using a PC XT to run those fountains as much as 15 years ago, because it cost, they said, $30 million to change. So in fact, the drives were obsolete about 30 years ago, and they've been scouring the world to try to find drives. And when something failed, one of the sprayers failed, they would just reassemble them from parts they had laying around and try to get one to work and replace it. And that happens a lot because there's a lot of legacy equipment doing that. In that case, what we did is we made a device to make an Allen Bradley drive look like their old drive, and that kind of solved that problem. So legacy is certainly an issue that most people that got to deal with, especially in the United States, where we've got a lot of brown plants. Another thing is normalization. We don't get clean data out of things, and there's a lot of stuff that has you get data in different, comes in different units and different, in different mechanisms. For example, there was a guy that was he wanted to collect organic milk data from different farmers, but he wanted to get that in advance. But what would happen is, because these were all independent farmers, he had the trucks that would go around and collect the data from those tanks. But one of them, some of them were using 4 to 20 milliamps to measure the level. Others were using digital mechanisms. Others were, measuring it in inches. Some were measuring it in millimeters. I mean, there was you get this morass. And if you just blindly move all that data into the cloud someplace, you end up with what I call a digital garbage dump. It's impossible to do anything with that data. So you have to normalize, scale that kind of data so that it gets cleaned. Then the other challenge now, especially that we're using the kinds of technologies we are to process the data, the kinds of things that Rick's talking about, is modeling the data is the third big challenge that I would like to address. So the problem with modeling now is that there's a lot of trade organizations, there's a lot of people trying to come up with standardized models. The idea is essentially just like a printer. You bring a new printer home, and you put it on your desk in your office at home, and you download the driver from the internet, and boom, you can talk to the printer. Well, there's people saying, why can't we do that on the factory floor? You buy a new drive, you buy an ultrasonic sealer, you buy a barcode reader, whatever it is, and you download the driver for that, and you get standardized data. Well, that's really, really hard to do, and what's happening mostly is that people are coming up with their own models that are tailored to their operation. So I was talking to Eli Lilly a few weeks ago, and that's the route that they've chosen. They're developing their own models because they don't care what the other pharmaceutical companies are doing. They're just going to tailor models to their own, so that once you have data that's modeled properly, now all of your back-end systems can deal and process that data directly. So that's the first thing. And then one of the points I'd like to make is, doing AI stuff is rather hard to do. We're still really, really, really early in that. And so I like to focus on, you can go to the next slide, is what I call human intelligence. And that's essentially, here's a story I'll tell you to illustrate what I'm talking about in that. There's a company that has, if you think about just what we call them dark communications factories, because they have nothing at all. They have just machines. They turn them on in the morning. They run them all day, and they don't really always know if machine 22 is running, machine 22 is down, machine 15 is out of stock. They don't know. So all they did was they put a sensor on the power line going into these machines, and they just every minute would measure, is the machine running? They could tell the machine's running and the machine's not running. And they came up with a little thing, so on a big chart, they just had a green line if the machine was running, they had a red line if it wasn't. What was cool about that was that the operator started to look at that and go, oh, look, my machine's doing better than your machine, Joe. And then the first shift started to compete with the second shift, saying, look, we were up 92% today. Are you guys going to be able to do that on second shift? And so it got to be, the operators got really into it. And so you don't have to do AI, you can do some really simple stuff that really can make a difference in the productivity of your factory. So those are the kinds of things that I have. And then, the next slide is just just basically, we're just talking about time series data here. Nothing really special at all. Was there one more after that? I'm not sure if that one. That's the other. So that's it. So that's the stuff that I have.
All right. Appreciate the info, John. If somebody was looking for more specific information, where would you direct them?
Yeah, there's rtautomation.com is our website. So
excellent. And next we'll hear from Michael Steger from Waukesha Metal Products.
First of all, I'm no expert. So I could be sitting out with you and going through the same stuff, but they just actually talked me into coming up and doing this. So as I walked out the door, my wife said 3 things. You know what? Speak slowly. I have a tendency to get fired up. Also, don't be so animated. So I told her I'm going to be sitting behind a desk. And we're also bumped up against booze. So as a manufacturer, we all know that we need that, right? I'm from Waukesha Metal Products. We are an international company. We have a stamping facility in Sussex, a fabrication facility in Grafton, Wisconsin, and we also are in San Luis Potosi. So we're an all-around manufacturer. We design, we build, we manufacture in-house, and fabricate. So our parts can be anywhere from $10,000 a piece down to 10 cents. So we have a very, very vast manufacturing production line. We can go to the next one. What I did is I'm kind of bringing, I think, some reality to it. I threw up here, we talk about KPIs and data that we collect on a daily basis, and this is probably familiar to everybody in here, right? You have all of your different functional areas, and if you're AITF or you're registered to ISO, you have all of these different things that you have to monitor on a daily basis. And so as we've been going through over the years, you take a look at your budget to revenue, your revenue to your budget, you're taking a look at the cost of poor quality is big for us. I understand you guys don't have any of those problems. You probably don't have any quality issues, but we do. And so one of the things that we talk about, and well-being is important for us, and we monitor safety. Obviously, you want a good, safe work environment. But one of the things that you take all of this information, you compile it, and you want to put the best performing measurements out there, right? What are the KPIs that are going to be the most beneficial to you? How are you going to align that with your goals? And I'm going to probably be very repetitive on some of the individuals that spoke earlier. And so you put those goals together to do your strategic planning and what's going to be a part of your decision-making process. And then how will this lead into some of the continuous improvement? And that continuous improvement for us is really coming from being a very, in automotive, and quite frankly, all of our customers are always taking on the automotive mindset, right? You make a bad part, the world comes to an end, and what are you going to do to fix it? So how do you implement that continuous improvement and then motivate the employees and then also make everybody accountable? So all of that for us leads to innovation. And a big part of that, and going back to what John was talking about, the data access, the challenge to be consistent, getting all the information together so you can make some good decisions, and also how can you apply AI? And AI is a big subject out there. Everyone's talking about it, but not everybody knows how to implement it, right? So I'll show you how we've taken some baby steps there. So, from the banking side to how we're running the facility to what's going out and our employees, what's important. I put together one thing that over the years, I've always often gone out to the floor. We've had meetings and say, well, so-and-so didn't show up on a daily basis. So-and-so didn't show up. So-and-so didn't show up. So if we go to the next slide, we took a look and I'm like, well, what's happening out here? So we took a look at absenteeism and what that impact on our overall business has been. And I just threw some numbers in here, but the data for us is true. So if you take a look just for 2024, but if I go back to 2021, 2022, all of this has been the same. So if you take a look at, and from the HR side of it, what is this doing for us? On a monthly basis, we could be losing $125,000 to really $300,000, depending on the mix, right? And it has become a problem for us. It has decreased our productivity. You have the potential loss in revenue, but you're not going to lose that revenue because you're going to work overtime. So you're going to push the overtime. Now what you're doing is you're putting stress on your management. That stress on the management, and I can tell you that I have a number of people, and fortunately for me, I'm in a seat where I've worked out on the manufacturing floor. I know people working 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, whatever, on their feet doing things, mistakes are going to be made. So shame on us, right? Not giving them either the equipment or the processes in place. So your operations costs go up, the morale can go down, all of the things that we talk about, and then it becomes this vicious circle. And these are the conversations that I've had many, many times. And again, you just say, oh, so-and-so's not here, not realizing the impact. So then you get into that cycle of the overtime, the sort, the rework, and all of this hits those key KPIs. And then you just, you're pulling your hair out as to what can you do to make it better. And of course, in today, people are sick, they're going to the doctor. Healthcare costs go up. If, there's a work-life balance now that's for us who have been in the business for a long, long time, sometimes that's a little difficult to swallow. I've got to admit to that, right? But the overall performance can suffer, so what do you do? So some of the things that we've done, as a lot of the speakers were talking about, innovation, getting into what can we do to make our lives easier. And when it comes to the automotive world, what can you do to actually design and implement quality into the system? And so that's become a big portion. And, we always throw this out there, but there's a major expense to this. There's a major, we talk about mindset, we talk about getting the employee involvement. We have found that, as we bring in some of the automation, that our employees are actually embracing that. And a lot of times they're coming up to us and say, hey, if we'd only do this, or if we would add this, or if we incorporate this, things happen. Because quite frankly, it's hard to find people. And if there's anybody in HR in here who's trying to work with people, I always get, 10 people didn't show up or 5 people didn't show up, whatever it may be, cross-train. Well, you got to have the people to cross-train. You can't, this whole circle. So optimizing processes and upskilling our employees, but also maintaining a positive mindset. One of the things that, I always talk to our leadership team, it's very easy to become, every one of us has a pessimistic in the room. That's not me, but I work with many of them, that you got to have a good positive mindset. You got to give the employees something to work for and take these KPIs that we have and fundamentally, what can we do to make it better. So if you take a look at the next slide here, this is how our organization has transformed over the last several years. I'm going to say probably 5. And as we walked into it, automation has become key. We have taken programs or processes that had 3 or 4 people down to 1. We have taken processes where you're actually doing some assembly and then it would go out for a secondary check on a fixture or whatever. Now that check is done within the automation system. We have torque testing in the automation system. So a lot of what Husko was talking about today, I mean, they're at a way above us. And we've actually, quite frankly, he was talking today about the opportunities that they have to work with guys like us. We've actually had them quote a number of systems for us. And I know that they always welcome people to go and tour that. But robots, making sure that we're putting systems in place, checking systems in place for the operators to make sure that we're not producing a bad part. So as we collect this data, we're as real time as you can get, but the other side of it too is that anybody who has data instrument, how many stampers, manufacturers, guys are in here? Am I just a loner? Okay. Well, a lot of our presses and things, so we're talking about tying into PLCs, a lot of us have data instruments or smart packs or things like that automatically we can tie into those PLCs pretty easily. So we've taken, our 80-20 rule. I think most of us work through the 80-20 rule anyways, is we have 13 primary machines out there that we're actually tying to the PLCs. We're working with a third-party source through a Waukesha extension program to actually start utilizing better on-time data. So those are some of the things that we're into and some of the things that we're trying to strive for as a small manufacturer. Again, these are big investments for us. So we really have to sit back and quite frankly, it also comes down to our customers. And just with the volatility of we do a lot of automotive, so the volatility of automotive industry, you'll promise this is a 7-year program, 10-year program. Well, is it? Right? And then if you invest in, and a lot of this that you've seen up here, you can actually go to the next page too, is, some of these systems are $400,000 or $500,000. For us in a manufacturing business, that's a nice small little press with a feed line, right? So we're taking the approach that this is the way that we have to go because it is harder to find people. We are definitely trying to get employees to get into apprenticeship programs. We talk to high schools. We talk to actually one of the grade schools now and talking with them. But taking all of this information and all of this data, the bottom line for us is that we really need to implement quality into our systems, collect that data so that we're not shipping a bad product to our customer. And it really doesn't, I don't know if it can get any simpler than that. But all the processes and the time and the energy and everything to design the sensors into the tools, to design the sensors into the processes, to implement that quality part of it, it's evolutionary, right? It's taken step by step, taking a small part of it. But we found that when we did that very first one, that there was a buy-in, and people saw that not only do I actually, I'm not going to lose my job, I'm actually becoming a little bit more valuable because now I'm learning how to run it, how to do the technology behind it, how to read and understand how to fix things when they go down, because a robot, when it goes down, you're screwed. I've been there, so I know. So those are the kinds of things that we're going through, and how we're trying to take that data and those key KPIs and just saying fundamentally, okay, let's just break it down to 4 or 5 things. We know that we need to do a good product. We need to know we have to have good quality. We need to be process efficient and effective. So break it down, simplify it, concentrate on that, and that's really what we've done as an organization. I think I spoke slowly. All right. I think that's all I got.
Great, thank you, Michael. You mentioned once you got started, then you had buy-in. And I'll pose this question to the group. What do you see as the biggest challenge to getting started?
It's just taking that first step. What we did, and to really take it back, is we were looking at cobots about 5 years ago, and we bought one and gave it to the engineering department and said, make it work. What can we do? Where can we utilize this piece of equipment? And then as they started going through, it probably took about 6 months for them to come up with the program. And once we did it and we started it, again, I think because we're a smaller company, it's a little bit easier to deploy some of this stuff because it's a conversation with a group of people. This is what we're going to do and move forward. But it's just making that first investment and once you do that and commit to it, I think everything else falls into place. Not as quickly as you would like, and not as and again, from a costing and the investment, a little more than you can expect.
Sure. Any thoughts on that, Rick?
Well, I would emphasize a few times so far today, I've heard start small, just do it. Begin in a very small, specific way. And I think specifically with data analytics, it does come back to, well, what are we trying to improve? Or what are our goals that we are attempting to change? And give the right people the right information so that they can be inquisitive and actually start asking those questions. Why is this different? And starts from the top. So having a very clear, here's our company goals. How does that break down to by unit? And then ultimately, well, where is the information to make it easy for someone to actually interact with the data, and free up the time, I believe, to do that analysis, and then act on it. And it doesn't have to be, heard many, many, many times, it doesn't have to be seismic, but if you start and you make it easy and people trust the information they're looking at, it's a big enabler. And that's what we've seen with our other customers.
Makes sense. So it sounds like, yeah, making that first leap of faith, that first decision is the toughest. John, what would you say to the folks that you had mentioned the legacy challenge before, some of the older equipment that is out there? How would you direct them to make that first step?
Well, the interesting story, I was talking to a supplier who makes painting systems for automobiles. And I happened to be visiting, and they were directed by their board of directors, who were advised by one of the big 5 accounting firms that there's $11 billion in IoT. What are you guys doing to do that? So they were told, we've got to do IoT. And so they took their they make the painting systems for Chrysler and Ford and GM, the big manufacturers. And they said, okay, we're now able to move the data into the cloud. And they said to me, so what do we do now? So I think one of the things that you have to have a goal in mind, because it's easy to, some of this stuff is, the technology is there just to do things really easily, but if you don't know what you're going to do with the data, it's kind of worthless to move forward. So I had 2 comments to them. I said, number 1, I don't think you own that data. because Chrysler and Ford and GM are not going to want the data about how much paint they're applying to their cars. That's kind of a trade secret, and so you can't do that, and you really need to think through this a lot more than you have now. So basically, I'm of the small project guy. Just start with something small, but with an idea of here's a problem I want to solve, and that's the kind of my advice on how to start something.
Makes sense. The topic of cybersecurity came up in one of the previous breakout sessions earlier today. As we look to automate the factory floor, what are your thoughts on cybersecurity once you start getting these machines to talk to each other?
Well, I've done a lot of work on cybersecurity, and I have kind of a different philosophy than a lot of people have. And there's the stuff I work on is fairly big machines that have a lot of interconnected devices. And there's a lot of people who want to encrypt those connections between devices and PLCs and processors. And I'm of the mind that you want to put a moat around it. And first of all, you have to do the simple things. You have to get rid of all the USB ports. You shouldn't have a Windows PC on the factory floor connected in the control loop. That's another one is that you also want to get rid of all any open Ethernet ports. Nobody should be able to connect anything to the factory floor network without going through a security device. And there's a company that I work with that I really like. It's called Dynics. They're out of DYNICS. They're out of Ann Arbor. That make a really great white box, essentially that whitelists all the messages. The big advantage that on the factory floor is that we know every message that has to flow between devices on the factory floor. In the IT world, they don't know tomorrow what users they're going to have, what applications they're going to be running, what new devices are going to be added. Everything's really stable on the factory floor, and we have to take that as an advantage. And on my LinkedIn, you can find, I have a series of posts I've written called Truth, Lies, and Myths of Manufacturing Automation that address a lot of these points. Cybersecurity is really important. And I'll tell one other story. There was an automobile company that was out of business for 2 days recently. I was sworn to secrecy about which one it was because they don't want to know. Everybody feels shame about this, and they certainly don't want their investors to know. About 9:15 one morning, all of the AGVs on the plant floor just stopped, and right away they were running around with their, we've been attacked, we've been attacked, and they're on the phone with the AGV manufacturer, and they are trying to figure out. We're looking through the IT logs. Where did this malware come in? How are we going to do about this? And on the factory, in an automobile plant, and finished assembly, an hour of downtime is $2 million. So they're losing tons of money. And about 11:30, all the AGVs just started up again, ran through lunchtime. After lunch, 1:15, they stopped again. And this went on for 2 days, and they lost unbelievable amounts of money. Turned out that there was a vendor who had been coming into that plant for 15 years, knew a lot about their manufacturing system. And I won't explain the technical details, but essentially he put his phone on the network, and all the AGVs were trying to talk to his phone. And anytime he was in the plant, the AGVs would talk to his phone. When he went to lunch, they just happily went back to work. And so when he came back from lunch, there they were. They just tried talking to his phone again. And it took 2 days. So there's a lot of simple things with the product that we've just licensed addresses that kind of an outage, and it's called IntraView, and we're trying to bring that to the market right now. Go ahead.
Michael, how is...
Not much to add to that, but I will tell you, so obviously security is key, and we're actually working through a number of programs. So we again, we're a small company. We outsource our IT. We are counting on our third party to protect us. Several years ago, I don't know if anybody in the room has been hit. We have. We were hit through the third party. Somebody just hit a link. So obviously training is critical for us, making sure that the servers and everything are updated. And the other thing, does anybody do defense in here? So defense is a different one. So as you're working for defense and even some of the medical, you really have to protect your systems, and you have to, especially if you work internationally or, you need to have things separate there. So it really comes down to, in our organization, again, we outsource it, but we have a tremendous amount of training, know before, and a couple of other things. At first, when we did it, 30% of our company was hitting the link, right? Hey, what's there? And all of a sudden, now we're down to where nobody is. So really it comes down to the fact you don't know it, you don't understand it, you see a link, you just don't hit it. If they really want to get back to you or something, they'll call or email at another time. So that's really been ingrained within the organization. So as far as all the technical side of it, I count on the third party to make sure that we are safe and everything's protected. They give us updates. We have our black book now of anything to goes through. But I think there was a period of time, maybe it was a couple years ago, where a lot of us manufacturers and smaller manufacturers were hit, and we really understood that okay, this is for real. What do you do, and how do you back it up? So the backups are continuous. We do a lot of our ERP system is cloud. So actually, when we did get hit, our ERP system wasn't affected at all. So that was a good thing. It was really just what was on the servers. So any of the drives that you've got, any documents that are out there, that's where we were susceptible, but we were able to shut it down pretty quickly. So again, it's just protecting what you have.
The other thing about cybersecurity is you have to be wary of bringing in processes and procedures and equipment that's too complicated, that you can't support. I went to a presentation by a guy from Procter & Gamble. P&G is a really rich company. They actually built a plant just to test automated automation. And it's all it does is move water around. It heats it up over here, cools it down over there, mixes it over here, and all the things that they do in their process plants. And they brought in all this really incredible equipment and all this automation. And they said, we love the amount of data we're pulling out of this plant, but we are never going to use this in one of our production facilities. And everybody goes, well, why? The reason is because we can't train maintenance people to maintain that equipment. So if something goes down at 2 o'clock in the morning, they'll have no idea how to fix it. If we train them up to be able to the point where they can do that, they'll leave us and get 3 times their money down the road. So you really have to, it's really a trait. You got to be careful about bringing in really expensive, complicated automation.
Rick, what do you?
I had a question actually for the group here. Is anyone willing to share how they've used data that they've collected one way or the other, how they've used that to solve some business challenges or business problems, or maybe something that didn't actually go as planned, and why? What you learned from that? Anybody willing to share?
We're a smaller shop, and we work with a variety of customers. And for a long time, we were in line. We did what we did. We basically did piecework, so that's their cost, and everything was happening. So we were able to start looking at productivity, not to make people work harder, but to understand and be pricing the right way. We give a good value to our customers. And quite frankly, we're able to go back to some customers and say, hey, we can lower the price. And some customers say, hey, we're missing something here because it's not what you said. But we can open what we do as our processes back to our customers and share that data with them so that we can hit the outcomes that they were ultimately looking for when they came to us. So for a very small manufacturer, it's kind of elevated us to step up to the plate of other companies and say, we've got data, we can provide that data to you to utilize to your end use now.
That's a great example. There are a few other hands before. Just go ahead and we're shout out, please.
Just a general comment we've seen across many manufacturers is
have data at the source, you lose it, and then you come back at the end and try to recreate it, and it's always wrong. Because you collected it for one purpose, you try to use it for a different purpose, and it's really basic stuff, but you have it, you lose it, you try to recreate it, it's just dead across the
To that point, when we put up all those KPIs and you're taking a look at all that data on a month-to-month basis, when they go to your leadership team, how often is it, oh yeah, okay, that's put it down, now you're putting out a fire, and you don't even look at that until it's in. So you're not proactive, you're reactive. And I think many of us are like that. And trying to get to that proactive side of it is really the challenge. And that's why when I put up all those KPIs, quite frankly, all those KPIs, we have to do more than that, because every functional area has to have something. Because if you're, like I said, if you're AITF and you're automotive, then you can put VDA in that. Now the customers are specifying what they want. So there really is no, nice standard out there, right? Every customer adds everything that they need to do. And oh, by the way, I want you to track this. And oh, by the way, I want you to track this. And it's meaningless to us. And quite frankly, but they want it. So you do it there, you look at it on a monthly basis, and then, or you put the data point in there on a monthly basis. But, those KPIs, they have to be meaningful. They have to drive the business. And the bottom line is hitting your gross margins, your EBITDA, whatever you are, your company is actually the data point for them, for bonuses or profit sharing, whatever it may be. That's the challenge, because you'll have those data points, and okay, here's the charts, here's what it is, but what are you going to use? What's going to drive the business? What's going to drive profitability? What's going to drive, performance and making sure that you're doing the right things? Sorry,
there are a few other hands before.
That's fine.
Anyone else want to share? I saw a few other hands go up before about how you've used data to improve, or what you've learned from it.
I would just make another comment off of that, and make sure that the people who are actually driving it, doing the activity that is generating that data, can actually see that in their work, so that they know I'm contributing to that, which gives them a sense of accomplishment, a sense of purpose. If the data's up here, somebody on a machine has no idea what inventory turns in the plant. But you tie the data into something they can directly see. That makes a huge difference.
Yeah, it's powerful.
I'll have just a final comment from the prior session. That there was a pretty strong, to me, resonated an emphasis on automating things that are unpleasant. And so the tie-in that I'll share for the group here is, if the chore of gathering and presenting the information that people need to make decisions is an unknown set of gears that someone is churning in the background, and if there's not visibility on who's doing that, if it's a manual process or semi-manual, that's an excellent example where using analytics tools can eliminate that unpleasant work and actually present the data clean so people can make decisions on it by eliminating steps to get it to that end point. And there's, I believe, a lot of hidden cost that people aren't aware of because it's not visible. So in one of the other examples, not necessarily knowing some of the detail steps that someone is doing, it can just be a hidden cost. And so the tools, again, can make it presentable and usable and eliminating waste in this case.
Thank you. Any other final thoughts before we open it up to the audience for any questions they might have?
Fine.
All right, well, we have a few minutes left. If anybody has anything else they want to take a deeper dive into, now is the time. Yes, sir.
Question for Mike. He's thinking about automation, he's talking about the projects. Is it a 10-year deal, is it a 7-year deal, is it really going to last that long? How do you think about payback? You got the uncertainty of the business that might be coming your way, the outlay of capital. Do you have any rules of thumb you use, or how do you think about payback?
Yeah, fortunately for us right now, because of the line was drawn in the sand on EV. We do EV, we do a lot of ICE, but now a lot of our ICE programs are being extended 5, 10, 15 years based on what the customers are telling us. One of the things, and of course, maybe your customers pay for automation. Well, they don't. Ours don't. Ours barely want us to make any money, right? But what we do is we anything that's touching that part. So we do not sell them the robotics. We don't sell them anything else. It's anything that's touching the part. So out of a $400,000 system, we may say it's $100,000 of yours. You pull the work, you can take every other component out, but we own all of the other stuff. So that's what we've done. But it's typically based on the fact that we can improve the performance, improve the output, add the quality in there. I will tell you that I don't think we've had a return on investment that has gone longer than 2 years. And we're working on a major one right now, which is about a $500,000 investment, but it's a 0.97, so it's under a year of benefit. So, and that's exactly what we did. It's a big system. It's going to basically, you put the part on, when it comes out, it's ready to go, and that's how we're approaching it. And once you're working with your integrators, and we've actually brought in, the other thing I would suggest on the automation side is if you have somebody either in the maintenance side of it, or you have in my case, my son, he's our automation guy. And he continues to learn, continues to go to school, continues to be a part of that. If you can elevate somebody internally, even if they're working with the integrators, and the guys who are integrated and the guys that really, to get that return on investment, I highly suggest working with somebody. And again, it was when they talked about networking with, we have a lot of friendly competitors. A lot of us have different niches. We may be stampers, but we all have talk, have conversations. Network with somebody and get a good integrator in there to work with your people, and then they'll just continue to elevate. And that's what we've seen. I actually need to hire another guy, but that's a difficult thing to do. But that's where everything is going. So yes, we sit back, we take a look at in the whole quoting process. Okay, where can we gain? What can we do? Where can we see some? Obviously we want to make some money, but at the same time, what can we do for the customer to give them a good part? And that's really that's kind of our approach. But you will find that once you put this stuff together, the payback can be relatively quick. Once you sit down and start doing the calculations.
Great question. Anybody else?
So I work a lot with Power BI, Floor and Power BI. So Power BI is really good for me, like to say I want to see for the last year or the last 3 months. But how do you find like trends? Like every month I run my 12-hour machine is going down. I have a hard time figuring that out. I have to download like every month separately to see it. Is there a way to do that in Power BI?
I think I'll restate the question, and I'll show you something here that maybe will illustrate the point. This isn't exactly what you were asking, but I think you were talking about, well, what if I have data that I can pull current data, but I don't have the ability to look at that same data as prior points in time? Okay, so what we've used, I'll just show an example here. Looking at backlog, pretty typical, simple concept. What is the total value of unshipped orders as of a point in time? It's not exactly the same thing you're asking, but close. And so in this case, the ability to get a trend of what is that backlog is actually, in many cases, not in ERP systems. So how do we display it here? Pretty easy from a data warehouse technique is we capture that information on a daily basis and we write it to essentially a log table. So as long as you can get the data as of a point in time, you can essentially snapshot it, build your own kind of mini data warehouse, and that's how something as basic as what is our trending of this information. If I can't pull it in a report and I can't write a query to get it, we just snapshot it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good question. Anybody else? All right. Well, we do have a reception going until 6:30 this evening, but thank you very much for your time. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you all learned something, and enjoy the rest of your evening.